so much for having us. It's great to be here. I just want to first say before we get started that I'm so excited to see people I work with and friends, and I see the name of a student. I don't see the video, but huge thanks to you guys for being here. It means so much. Especially launching a book in a pandemic is a really strange experience. I mean, it was right before the pandemic got going. So it's just so nice to have ways to connect like this over what has been like soul work, essentially.
Okay, well, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to participate in this great event and to see you, Deb. It's the last time that it's been many months. To just jump right into things, can you tell us what the book is about?
Yeah. The book is essentially, it's a meditation on what we hold on to and what we let go of and how we remember other people and ultimately how we're remembered. And it's basically a book about caring and caregiving for my father, who was at once totally adoring and just an amazing dad in so many ways. And he was also abusive, and it's both. So the book is essentially a meditation on ambivalence and what does it mean to kind of hold two contradictory realities at the same time and to kind of manage both of those. It's also an exploration of what home means and how do we make home, how do we, live in our homes, grow up in our homes, get constrained and maybe stifled in our homes, and then ultimately, how do we remake our home? How do we come back to a sense of home in ourselves, which was what the journey with writing the book was about. The other thing I will say is that since it's a braided memoir dealing with issues of domestic violence and caregiving, it's also a professionally informed memoir. So a lot of my insights as a sociologist come through my insights as having worked with survivors of violence as well as violent men. I was working in a battering intervention program for I guess about 12 years in Boston, the first battering intervention program in the country. So I bring all of those kinds of insights into the book as well, to make sense of and kind of make meaning of these issues. And I didn't know it when I titled the book, Welcome to Wherever We Are, but it's sort of a slogan for the moment, right? And slogan for the time that we're in, kind of what does it mean to navigate through darkness and find some lightness and all of that. So it's really been an interesting journey to talk about this book in this particular moment that we're all finding ourselves in.
Yeah. Well, with that, would you mind reading a short excerpt from it, and then I'll ask you a few more questions about it.
Sure. The other thing I want to say before I just jump into reading, and I think actually, it'll come through a little bit in the reading too anyway, is that when I say that this is a book about domestic violence too, we're so used to hearing about domestic violence in terms of physical assaults, in terms of sexual assault, rape, incest, all of that. And that's not really my story. My story is one of emotional abuse, psychological, gaslighting, all that kind of stuff. Really like verbal, emotional, and also financial control. And the other thing that my dad did, which is something that we don't always talk about in terms of domestic violence, is that he was often threatening me and other people. And so we don't always talk about threats enough in terms of how debilitating they can be to the other person, and how they can create this sort of like, just tyranny over the other person. So the part I'm going to read to you, and I know a couple of you have read it, which is kind of cool. So then there are probably people here who haven't read it, which is exciting as well. I was going to read to you something from The Gold Pen, which is chapter 9 of the book. And the thing about this chapter is I wrote it as a chapter for a book, for an anthology that was titled Letting Go. And I didn't know at that time that I was going to write my own book. I was just kind of meditating on this gold pen that was my father's. And I was just trying to make meaning of what that was all about, because I had lost this really important pen that he used to write copy. He was an advertising executive for many, many years, over 50. And I moved to South Carolina from Boston. I did everything possible to keep this pen and to never let it go, because it felt very tethered, like my creativity felt very tethered to his through this pen. And regardless of how incredibly organized and like neurotic I am about keeping everything straight, I lost the pen when I moved to South Carolina. And it was devastating to me because I don't lose things, and how could I lose that? So I wrote this chapter for that book. You'll have to read my book, though, to find out if I found the pen or didn't find the pen. Oh, cool. Thanks, Sandra, for holding up the book. We should get a screenshot of stuff like that. But so, so the thing is, though, is that then I was really lucky, because then the book chapter got picked up by Utne Reader, and it got exposed to a whole host of more people. And that was exciting. And then I had written another chapter too called Sugar. And after writing these two, I realized I was really on the way to making this into a book. So I do want you to know that when I wrote this, it was really the second chapter I wrote for the book, and it shows up here as chapter 9. And I didn't even know I was writing a book when I wrote it, which I think is kind of inspiring for people who are wondering kind of what to do with their writing as well. This part that I'm reading to you, I actually wrote in 2009 when I was visiting my father for one of our last visits before he died. And this is also something interesting, because I'm reading to you exactly what I wrote in my field notes, because I basically took a lot of notes on legal pads as I was visiting with him. So I'm going to share with you that, and then share with you a little bit after that. I watch you as you sleep, not unlike you probably watched me as I slept as a newborn baby and as a young girl. In wonder, in awe, in calm, and in worry. A parent watches a child sleep with anticipation of a future. An adult child watches a sick parent sleep with a sense of the past. You are finally still and quiet. You, a man who I know is chaotic and loud. We rest in this calm as you fall in and out of slumber, and I grade papers. I need to study your face, memorize it, as I know I'll need it one day. Yet the you now is not the you I want to remember. In a few days, I'll be back with over 100 students, giving lectures, attending meetings, going to a concert, a lunch with a friend, a performance of the vagina monologues. And in my week ahead, I worry about being too busy, about running from one activity to the next, breathless. Yet one day, Daddy, you did this too, right? How would you restructure those days now? What did you hope for? What do you hope for now? With your tongue half out of your mouth, you resemble a little boy with Down syndrome. You look tired, though I can't tell if you're tired of this life. Yesterday, I brought you coffee from Caribou with one of the napkins that made a jab at Starbucks that said, our coffee is smooth and fresh, because burnt and bitter were already taken. Whenever I see great lines and logos, I think of you. Your creativity still shines through as we leaf through Metropolitan Home and marvel at minimalist spaces. Your stained maroon sweatpants are pulled up halfway toward your chest, and your stomach looks distended. Earlier today, I saw as you put imaginary pills to your mouth with your fingers, something I assumed to be a self-soothing ritual you performed after the nurse told you it was not yet time for more medication. Being in Cleveland, I'm surrounded by childhood friends hanging out with their dads, younger men than you, in their 60s and their early 70s, robust, athletic, energetic men, vigorously playing tennis and golf, working, traveling, and chasing after their dreams, not figments of their imaginations in thin air. Oh, Daddy. Your eyes open suddenly, and you ask, what are you writing? I quickly respond, oh, nothing really, it's just for school. And then, because I really did kind of panic when he asked me, it was like, oh gosh, he's gonna know what I'm doing. I'll be found out or something. Because writing about family is always an interesting thing. But I wanna read you the next part of how I reflected on this in the book. However, writing about my dad in front of my dad seemed like a profound act of betrayal. It also felt mean. As I see it now, it helped me grieve and let go. Contained in a tight, unattractive physical space with my dad, enmeshed in his care in ways I probably should have never been, I was writing to untangle a knotty family narrative, to finally record and understand my experience as my own. By writing in front of him, I think something else happened that was necessary. I came to realize that all we had to give each other was space, psychic space. Most importantly, I needed to give him space and quiet to eventually die. My dad's almost 8 years of debilitating illness made me grasp his final inability to help and to guide me. And that gave me the space I needed to dream of what I wanted to do. Though he helped me and was involved in most major decisions I made in my life, dementia forced him to check out. It also forced me to check in with how well I was writing my own life. So that concludes the portion I was going to read.
Okay. And so when did you decide to write the book, and why did you decide to write the book at that time?
Yeah, I had always wanted to write a book. It has been a life dream of mine. I want to write more books. But this book, I mean, I knew I wanted to do some writing about this pretty much back into, let's see, probably about 2008 or so, even earlier, but about 2004, really, I guess, when he fell. When he fell and he broke his hip on Christmas Day at the Cleveland airport, and he was about to take me and then my now ex-husband to Florida for a trip, and that just, his life went tumbling down when he fell. And I think at that point I was starting to, I was certainly starting to write some things down. I was starting to try to make meaning of this situation. My parents had just split up very soon before that. They were 65 and 72 when they got divorced, which is unusual. I was about to turn 30. So it was a kind of an intense time, and I usually make sense of things by writing about them. But the sense that this could be an actual book really did become more clear after I wrote the particular chapter that I just shared with you.
Okay. And so you touched on this a little bit, but what, if any, inner conflicts did you have to write such a personal book?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you know, it was, in a way, it was more conflictual when I was trying to write and he was still alive, of course. And then he died, and it was like, there is something, as scared as I was of a parent and both of my parents dying, and my mom is in a very fragile state, and I still feel very nervous about her all the time with stuff like this. That hasn't totally gone away. But what I can say is that I understand when people say that when a parent dies, there's something freeing. And it always sounded kind of cruel. And I really now understand it better in a way, that it did kind of release me to, you know, I can write about this, and it can be done in a way that's not vengeful, and it can be done in a way that's full of love for him and even for myself. And that I have this, I really started to believe, and I definitely believe this now, that I had this ethical responsibility to write this. Like, for me, this was sort of like how I was going to put out passion and purpose in the world. That I had this life experience, this ability to write, and expert knowledge in the field. And I better use it in a way that would help other people to make sense of their own experiences. So to me, it was sort of like I needed to do it. The rest of it kind of started to tumble out of me after I had done those first 2 chapters. And that's another thing I was going to say related to your earlier question, is that I started to know that this was a book the way I constructed it, because the first chapter was titled Sugar, and I was pretty much meditating on all of these like sweet memories of my dad, but then underneath it, the sense that, you know, like too much sugar, you can just feel sick. And, you know, so and then I did the chapter, The Gold Pen, and I started to realize I was actually following a very long-standing tradition in literature, which is called the object correlative, where you basically are taking an object and you're kind of unpacking it in a sense. And it was like each chapter of the book is a different object that kind of stands in symbolically for a theme or a life issue or something. Because I deal with a lot of stuff around only children, you know, divorce, my parents, you know, remarriage, my mother's, and then my connection with my partner. So there's, you know, there's so many different pieces to the book. And the other thing is, if you haven't read it, I will say, it's really not just depressing. It sounds like these topics sound uber depressing, but it's like, there's definitely a lot of light and hope. And I don't know. I mean, people say I can be funny, you know, and I'm cool with that. So it's like one of those things where there's definitely some humor in the book, some dark humor, but there's definitely there's a lot of funny parts to it as well. So, yeah, so there's both. But I really felt an obligation to puncture some family secrets and to, you know, help other people realize, like, you can cultivate your own voice and you can and should speak out about things that are unjust.
Yeah. And so with your father, of course, being such a focal point of this book, what do you think were the factors that made him the kind of man that he was, both good and bad?
Yeah. That's a great question. You know, that's the thing, right? That's the age-old story. That's the life cycle. Like, we don't really know our parents as well as we maybe want to or think we do or whatever, because we came in the middle of the story. Like, so we never know their beginning, and we just hear it through, like, filtered through them. And if life works as it is supposed to, we do know the middle, and we know their ending. But they, in turn, they know our beginnings and sometimes our middles, and they don't really know how the story ended. Like, I wish my dad could have met Mike, my current partner. I wish he could have seen me move to South Carolina. I wish he could have seen the book, actually. Yeah, so I don't know. Say more of your question again, because I think in trying to say some of that, even was getting onto another piece. So repeat the rest of that.
Yeah. So what were the factors you think that made him into the man that he was, both the good aspects of him and the bad aspects?
Okay. Yeah. So well, let me give you a context. So he would be 93 years old this September. So he was born in 1927. And that just seems kind of mind-boggling to me thinking about it now. You know, and he was unusually smart, and he was unusually progressive, actually, politically, especially for his time. People still say I need to see that TV series Mad Men, because I guess that really speaks to the kind of world he was living in and working in for so long. So I think, you know, he came of age during, you know, all of that. So being born in 1927, you know, coming from an upper middle class Jewish family in New Jersey, and then moving to Ohio, where he met my mom and had me. But, you know, advertising is such a cutthroat business. And through doing this book tour, I came to meet some people who had worked with my dad even years before. And I came to learn things about the advertising agency that he worked at, which I wasn't even aware of, some of the stuff, and some of the violence and the chaos in the workplace, and just the way it was so pressury. So I do think that factored into his controlling personality and all that sort of stuff. And then, you know, at the same time, he, as I say, he was pretty progressive on a lot of other things. You know, I mean, I came of age with a dad who said, you know, you can be anything you want to be. You should run for president one day. I mean, that was not when we had, you know, women running for president, really. You know, it was like, I wasn't interested in doing that. But the point was that, like, nothing, there were no bounds. Like, he like pushed me and encouraged me, and he was involved, and he came to lots of school events. I mean, all of my school events. He never missed any activity. He was just an unusually involved father. So I think he resisted. I guess that's part of what I'm saying, is he resisted a lot of the masculinity norms that were abundant when he was coming of age. But then there's certainly ones that he adhered to very strongly, you know. And then his parents, I came to learn at the end of his life, and it's in the book, I came to learn that his mother had been abused by his father, and he sided with his mother, and yet he reproduced, a lot of these things anyway. So it's complicated. I mean, I think there's so many different factors, you know, and just the larger society that we're embedded in.
And how has it impacted you as far as him being your father? How do you think it has shaped your life?
It's a good question. I think he is so in me in so many ways. I mean, you know, that's the other thing about someone who you love and care about dying, is like they're never really far. And so I feel like his passion for the written word, his passion for writing, his creativity is like just coursing through my veins. Like, that is totally there. And then his frustration with just wanting so much more from himself, being so ambitious. I mean, he was like that. I feel that way as well. I think I got so many of my best qualities in a way. And then at the same time, it was very formative to me, though, watching this, knowing this was wrong, I mean, it certainly made it so that's why I wanted to work with violent men ultimately. That's why I wanted to, I really wanted ultimately to help him change, right? Not really all the circles of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of men I worked with in Massachusetts. I was trying to really get to my dad, right? So it's like, there's, that it informed me professionally. It informed me in terms of the stuff I teach. I always have stuff about violence against women, especially in all of my classes. It's like, you can't even escape a class with me. Like, you gotta look at those issues of gendered violence. So yeah, I mean, it has definitely impacted me for good and for not, I mean, in a certain way. And, but I even think that the ways in which he was so difficult, I have been able to find ways to make my own life better from it and to try to help other people. So certainly I took some of that, the crappier stuff, if you will, and I still tried my very best with so much work to turn it around so that it would be different for my students and be different for the clients I worked with. So yeah, it definitely impacted me, absolutely, for sure. And the other reason it impacted me is that, I didn't grow up with siblings. So this was like a small, like tiny, tiny, fragile family, very strong, very fragile. And my parents, just big personalities. My dad was kind of a larger than life personality. That's what made it so hard to kind of get out from under this sometimes.
Yeah. And how did you cope with all this? I mean, how did you come out on the other side with your sanity?
Yeah. So many different things. I mean, certainly therapy. I did therapy and I recommend it. I think it's a good thing for pretty much everybody to do, to just kind of look in the mirror, question some things, question some patterns. It was especially helpful. I didn't even, know Mike, my current partner. But I know that all of that work I did for all those years, all that interior work helped me be in a better position to have a good relationship. Because that's the thing about, if you've grown up with violence and you, or any of these kinds of issues, and if you're committed to doing something about it, you can be in a relationship in I think, a much more wonderful way overall. So, I mean, I did therapy, I did meditation stuff, I did, and certainly writing. I mean, writing was a huge way that I kind of, made meaning of it, made sense of it. I certainly learned a lot about, all of it through even writing this book.
And how did your perception of your dad change over time, like say from the time that you were a young girl to now?
That's a good question. I mean, actually it's interesting. I'll say if any of you are interested, I wrote a very short essay kind of about this very thing for Brandeis magazine, and it's called Both Sides of the Truth. So it's Both Sides of the Truth. It's with Brandeis magazine. It's totally available online for free. It's easy to find. It kind of encapsulates the book too, because I was always dealing with that issue of like feeling as though in a certain way I had the best dad in the world, and telling him that, as a child, also feeling like at a certain point, like that was a way to be loyal. Right. But in so many ways he was to me the best dad in the world, until I started to examine other things. And then it felt like, wow, he's deeply flawed, as we all are. And that might have been the most important part of also writing the book, was just realizing in so many ways he did his best. And in so many ways he would probably be heartbroken by this book and very irritated and humiliated by parts of it, but probably also would feel a tremendous amount of love because that permeates the page, I think. So, I mean, it's all of this is kind of like both and, it's, there's so much kind of both and to every chapter, to, you know, to how I feel about him, to how he impacted me, to how I'm dealing with my life now. Yeah, there's just so much different, you know, different stuff to embrace with it. Did you want to ask me more?
And what has been your mom's reaction to the book? And I'll start with her first, and then, you know, if there were other close friends of the family that, I mean, so starting with your mom, what does she think about the book?
That's a good question. So, she got to read it. So all right, I should sort of back up for a second and say that starting in July of 2018, my mom really became very unwell, let's say. You know, she fell, her life has not been the same. She is not in a good situation. She has 24-hour care. That's been going on for a couple of years. She'll be 86 in January. She got to read the book, you know, before all of that, because it was actually already ready, you know, to go. The publishing process just takes such a long time. So she has read the entire book except for the epilogue. And the epilogue would probably break her heart. I referred to my mom as being gone because she's not here in the same way anymore. But I think she might appreciate parts of the epilogue too. She loved the book. I mean, she absolutely loved the book. And so my mom was just a super avid reader, like just voracious. She would have adored going to Malaprops if she ever made it to Asheville. I mean, she read like 3 books a week, easy. And she read all the best stuff. And she was just my total cheerleader with this. Like, she was just like, I read tons of books and I know good writing. And she was also an English teacher. And she was just like, you got to get this out. Like, you got to, you know, she was definitely behind me going to conferences, going to, you know, try to find an agent, all that kind of business. So she was really into it. And the other thing that's kind of sweet and sort of funny is that my mom never had a computer and she doesn't do email. And every time I wrote a chapter, I printed it out on my printer. I ran to the post office in Bluffton, South Carolina, and I sent it to her on Cape Cod because that's where she lives in Massachusetts. And a few days later, I would get a call. She calls me Debbie, and it would be like, Debbie, I just read whatever chapter it was. And then she would say, you know, I love this, I love that, I think you should fix this. But she never challenged any of my memories. And in fact, I asked her, Mom, am I remembering some of this correctly? Or did I get this right? And she was always affirming. So I feel really grateful, like really, really grateful. And it kind of helped me to see that, like, sometimes as memoirists, we get so paralyzed and afraid with, like, oh gosh, if we write about our family members or complications with family members or friends, they're going to turn on us. They're never going to want to talk to us again. But my mom, I think she so values creativity. She was an artist all her life. And so her way of making sense of the world was to put out, you know, paintings and doing printmaking, and all of her work is abstract. Now that's interesting to me as someone who writes very, like, you know, very sharp, like, about what's really happening and cuts to the chase. So I look at it as, you know, she got to express herself through her work, and I was going to do it differently because I'm not going to start painting. I could never, it's like I knew I was never going to be as good as she was. So I was going to find my own pursuit, my own thing that I could shine at. And so she was just never, she never really tried to trample on that. I think, though, at points when I had difficulty with her, especially right before she started to not be doing so well, then I was starting to hear a little bit of like, are you going to write a book about me? And I think she got a little nervous. So she's like a super, super private person. And this was a huge thing for her. But I think she's really proud of me. She did come to one of my very first, well, actually, I guess that was my first reading back however many years ago, at the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center when I was workshopping one of the chapters for the book. And I was talking about my dad calling her names, and a lot of them were just really vulgar and really ugly. And she sat there and heard it all and was just, it was a pretty beautiful moment. I'll never forget it. So she's figured it out in her own way. But yeah, she's complicated too. There's no doubt about it. I'm trying to write a piece about her actually now.
Well, with we're about 6:45, so
Okay.
I think, Patricia, this may be a great time to look at questions that came through the chat room, or however you refer to it.
Thanks to Stephanie for posting the article that Deborah referred to, Both Sides of the Truth. If you all go into the chat, you can click on the link to that. And while you're listening to the Q&A, that might bring up some additional questions that you may have. First of all, a bit of praise for Deborah. Karen says, this is so important for those of us who have struggled with these same parental feelings. Thank you. And then there's a question, you did touch on this, Deborah, but this is from Jennifer. Did you find it therapeutic to write this book in working through the father-daughter issues that you couldn't work through when he was alive? So I'd like to kind of reshape it also to say, what's the difference between working through this subject when the parent is alive versus afterward as well?
That's a really good question. Yeah, it definitely was therapeutic to write about. I mean, it's hard. Like, would I call it therapeutic then, or like a catharsis? I don't know. I mean, I think people refer to writing like this, like that a lot. And to me, at some point though, this is a funny thing as a writer, but at some point then there's the craft. And like, so the exciting part for me was actually when I would get into some of it so much that then it started to be like we were characters. And then I knew I was actually hitting my stride too. Because if I was just doing it in a way that was therapeutic, it was going to only be sort of like what he did and how it made me feel. And it became more nuanced than that in a way. And so, and I think then the writing got better when it was like, especially when I could pull back and read it, or, read it over and then feel like, okay, this isn't just my story. This is it is speaking hopefully to other people's stories. And I so appreciate, like, when Karen was saying like it resonates and it has that sort of sense of universality, like just any complicated family dynamic, these sorts of tense situations, the love, the fear, the ambivalence, all that stuff. But I think I look back on it now and think it was more therapeutic than maybe when I was actually doing it, because that was hard. Like, it was a lot of work, but it's almost like I can look at this now and think this was the thing I wanted to do so much in my life. And this is like, I look at this and I just go, this is love. Like, this is just, 200 and whatever, 42 pages or something of just 245 pages of love. Like, it's just, of like how I came to learn love and got screwed up around those messages and relearned them, and I'm learning them with, with Mike, and how I dealt with them with Mark, my previous partner. So I don't know, I guess it's just, ultimately, I guess I can look at it and think it was therapeutic. I'm not sure I felt that all the time in it, is probably the more fair answer to that.
When
Did that answer both of you, or?
I think so.
Okay.
So there's always an interest in the writing process, and I hope after Deborah, Sandra, you'll answer this question too, because of course academic writing is very different from the memoir or other genres. And I know you're really, Deborah, a public intellectual who's writing for Sociology Today. So
Psychology Today, just so you know.
I'm sorry.
I wish it was Sociology Today.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said,
no.
I think of your sociology background. Psychology Today. That's a Freudian slip. Thank you, Freud. How about that? That's a good Freud show.
I love it, though. I love it. If only sociologists made themselves as relevant regularly. We need sociology today, so I love the slip.
You read my mind on that. I was, as a person who taught sociology and who has a MA in it. I just love it. So anyway,
that's cool.
So shout out Freud. So what's your writing process like, and is it different according to discipline and genre? And Sandra, if you could answer that after Deborah, that'd be great.
Oh, I love this question. This is a very cool question, because I think that, since I write across genre, and I do memoir, I've also written a couple of poems, one that got published, one that's supposed to be published soon, and I've done academic articles and book chapters and all these different kinds of things. And then the kind of writing for Psychology Today and sorts of like op-eds and things. I would say in a certain way, it's all the same, because in all of those, across genre, I am writing about injustice and inequality and oppression and gender issues and ambivalence and kind of contradictory realities and paradoxes and intimacy in relationships. So it seems like it does not matter what the genre is. I'm always dealing with those subjects, and I'm using different like a different genre to deal with it depending on the audience. But I love reading creative nonfiction. I absolutely love memoir. I guess the stuff I like to read the most is nonfiction, and I like to read creative nonfiction, memoir, and poetry probably the most. And so I think one of the fun things for me in the book was sort of dropping in some sociological insights, or sort of writing about something so kind of descriptively or very specifically, and then pulling back kind of like a memoirist, a traditional memoirist, because I'm not trained as one. I don't have an MFA. It's like, but a traditional one would sort of zoom back out and look at it to make it more universal. I was like zooming back with my sociological lens, and so kind of like zooming in and zooming out with the material. So I find it more satisfying to write this way. I find it more satisfying to do Psychology Today and to write the pieces I do that are read more by just the general public. I find that far more satisfying than writing academic pieces, because they're not read by enough people, So I much more enjoy the connection with the public.
And
for me,
go ahead, Sandra.
I was going to say that I have a completely different experience, and really the experience has varied depending on what I'm working on. So with the Mind Body Peace Journal, a lot of the process was just reading all kinds of things, from the Yoga Sutra to recent memoirs to all kind of material to get the quotes. So my book, and I should have kind of backtracked a little bit about this. So my book, Mind, Body, Peace Journal, it's a meditational journaling book. So that for each day of the year, there is an inspirational quote from people ranging from the Buddha to Oprah Winfrey to, I mean, you pretty much, it really covers a wide gamut. So I did a lot of reading to find just the right quotes, and sometimes out of the entire, full-length book, it was only a sentence that resonated with this kind of book. Whereas, so with my first book, which was a narrative nonfiction book about how two very brave women, one African American, the other one white, literally risked their lives to help rebuild an African American church that had been destroyed by hate crime. And so with that process, a lot of it was just the research and interviewing. Actually, that probably took up so much of it, and then starting the writing process, and so it really has varied. What I'm working on two things right now. The first is the follow-up to Mind, Body, Peace Journal, and that will be out in about 1.5 years from now. So it will be a continuation of the concept of meditational journaling to improve the quality of your life, really. And so the title so far, of course, this may change with the publisher, but the title so far is The Resilience Journal, 365 Days to Balance and Peace of Mind. And the other thing that I'm working on, which is completely different, is a novel that I've been doing revisions of it now for really years. And what I find is that, it's just, I can just dive into it. I mean, it being a novel, I don't have to, there is some degree of fact checking, but it's really just the story that comes to me and just really turning it loose.
So I want to thank you both for that kind of exploration of your process. And then if you're interested, audience, in Deborah's column, I posted that in the chat, and it's from Psychology Today, got it right this time, Social Lights, although Sociology Today, Deborah, get to work on that right in your free time, yeah? And so thank you both for that, but take a look at her website. And Deborah's also mentioned her personal website, DeborahJCohan.com. So you can find her also on Facebook at Deborah J. Cohan Writing. So you can take a look at that. Deborah, we do have another question. And this is from, I want to say Laenda. Sorry if I didn't say the name correctly. Deborah, what is the most important message you would like for a reader to gain after reading your book?
What a great question. It's hard to pick just one. I think one important one, though, is that abusers aren't a monolithic enemy as much as we want to make it seem like they might be. That they have a sense of multidimensionality also, and that's also why people get attracted to people who are abusers, because it's not like they're doing that immediately all the time at all. You know, and that there's lots of qualities that are attractive and appealing and loving and sometimes also just seductive that get people kind of sucked into an abusive situation. So, so the multidimensionality of abusers is an overarching message I hope comes across. And then the other thing I hope comes across is the fact that abuse is not a life sentence. And it is not a, I mean, unless it becomes a death sentence, unless someone actually is murdered in it, right? But otherwise, it's not a life sentence. Like, there's lots of ways to reinvent your life. And that was the challenge for me. And I feel like the book, you know, I do come out a bit on the other side of things, and it hasn't plagued me forever, thankfully. And but I was just committed to doing a lot of the work. And I guess that's, you know, that's a huge piece of it. It's just that there is hope, there is light, and abuse isn't like, it doesn't mean that you'll never be in a healthy relationship. It doesn't mean that you'll never find love. It doesn't mean that you have to sort of relive the narrative that your parents had. I find myself in a different place, and I'm grateful.
So usually when we're wrapping up and we're coming to the end here, I wonder if Deborah and Sandra, you can think of maybe a book or two that you've read or you're reading, or one that you might recommend, of course, besides your own, that you think that the audience might enjoy, and it can be in any genre. And I'm going to buy you a little time by just giving some shout outs from the chat while you might be thinking of a book or two. Karen says to Deborah, looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you. And then also in the chat, we have Stephanie very kindly posted Sandra's website. You can go to sandraejohnson.net and find her website and more information about her work, and what she's doing there as well. So I hope that bought you a little time. I was trying to think about a book or two that you might suggest to us. Deborah, would you like to go first?
Sure. I think probably one of my very favorite books that I've read in the past year or so has been, I've been recommending this to everyone, and I think it's absolutely perfect for the moment also. It's called Almost Everything, Notes on Hope by Anne Lamott. And she, you know, is such a best-selling writer, and wrote Bird by Bird, which is an awesome book as well. So some people may know her other work, but I think Almost Everything, Notes on Hope, is just really beautiful in terms of, again, just sort of dealing with all of the mix of life. And it's just a really kind of a slim, beautiful book. And I'll also say a couple others that I just think are another really gorgeous, gorgeous memoir is called The Light of the World by Elizabeth Alexander. About her husband who died suddenly, and it's just a poetic book. And the other poetic book that's an amazing memoir is Kay Redfield Jamison's Nothing Was the Same. I think those are just beautiful books. So, and then I have my own beautiful book that I've received that I cannot wait to really delve into more, and it is oh, yay.
Hey, the check is in the mail.
Thank you, Stephanie, for posting those links. Sandra, do you have a recommendation or two for us?
Well, yeah, actually I do. And so probably one of the most compelling books that I've read this year is actually for young adults. And it's called The Children of Blood and Bone by a Nigerian American young writer by the name of Tomi Adeyemi. Hopefully I didn't butcher her name too badly, but it's a very just fascinating book about power, about how it can be used for good or for ill. And I think it's just so mind-boggling that that even though it's a book for young adults, it really it transcends age. I mean, I think people much older than somebody in their teens or early 20s could really get a whole lot out of it. Another book that I really love reading, and I think probably half of the world too, is Where Crawdads Sing. I think I may have got the title mixed up a little bit, but I'm sure a lot of y'all out there are aware of it. It's just so beautiful, the writing, and I love books that make the natural world a character, and so with that book, definitely the main character is who she is, partly because, well, a lot to do with, where she grew up and where she spent her entire life. So those are two recommendations.
Thank you so much. And definitely, Deborah, thank you for saying bye, Indy. I appreciate that. We all do. And Deborah, as we're closing out here, as somebody, I work at Pisgah Legal Services, and I'm a screener for domestic violence intake. And
wow.
So, I think that sometimes people may need a resource or two to kind of, if they realize they or someone they know is in a situation of domestic abuse, and that's not just physical abuse. Do you have a suggestion or something that we might be able to post where people, if they need to reach out to someone? I mean, there are a lot of places in the Buncombe County or Western North Carolina, but do you have one or two that you think,
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm going to shout out for three, I think. One is, the National Council Against Domestic Violence, so ncadv.org, and also RAINN.org, Rape and Incest National Network, so RAINN.org. And I would make a plug for Emerge, which is the first battering intervention program in the country. And that's emergedv.com. That's an awesome organization where I worked for all those years. And then if you're in the Beaufort, Bluffton, Hilton Head area, it would be Hopeful Horizons. But when you go on those national pages, you can also find local stuff through zip codes. And so if you're ever confronted with a situation where you have a friend or family member or someone who's asking you for help, and it's in a completely different place, like, I don't know, North Dakota, Idaho, whatever, you just don't know people, or you don't know, you don't have the connections, you can help them by looking there as well. Thanks for asking that. It's a great question.
I really wanted to include that as part of your event tonight. I think it's central to your story and a larger message and your research, your work. So thank you very much for that.
And also thank you for doing this work on the front lines. It is so tiring and difficult. And actually, I know someone who's on this call, who actually does work at Hopeful Horizons as well. So there's really, I mean, there are amazing people, tireless advocates like you who do this that make it so much better in the world. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for your work and for what you're doing to try to take away the ideas of stigma and the silence, that there is recovery is possible. There's hope out there, and there are people who understand, and so and who are also grappling with those issues. And so I appreciate that so much, and I encourage everybody to take a look at those websites and to reach out and find support, because there is support out there. There really is hope. So I want to thank you all for hanging in there. We did run a little over, but I think it was fully worth it. And I want to congratulate Deborah on this great success with her memoir. And I look forward to reading her first column in Sociology Today. No. I have to laugh at myself for doing that. But of course, she's on Psychology Today. But I think she's right. And I'm delighted that Sandra has given her book out and sold so much of her book. We appreciate her journal and those inspirational quotes and making us think more. Deborah's book makes us think more and is deeply empowering, and it's through her revelation and exploration that we are empowered to go on our journey. And I hope that you all find that. And thank you all for all the thank yous out there from Karen and Jennifer. We really enjoyed this event, and Malaprop, so really appreciate your attendance this evening. Congratulations, Deborah, on this latest accomplishment, and we really look forward to your next one. Stay in touch with us, and we hope to see you physically in the bookstore sometime. And Sandra, you too, but everybody stay safe, okay?
Thank you so much.